Hello and welcome to A&P 1 final review. As you can see, this is going to be composed of muscles and models. Unlike the midterm for A&P 1 lab, we're not going to have bones, we're not going to have the cell, we're not going to have skin, we're not going to have all those other models because now it's not going to be cumulative, so we're going to deal with muscles, neurons, brain, spinal cord, eye, and then the ear. So let's get started, and hopefully after this lecture you will kind of have a better understanding of what is expected for you to memorize, what is going to be on the test to help you with some of the anxiety that you might have during this process of studying for such a difficult final. Let's get started. So first, half of your questions are going to come from muscles, which means that if the test is 50 questions, around 25 questions will be just based off of muscles. And if you go back to the lectures that we've talked about with muscles, we've known that you need to know the location of the muscles. You have a couple of extra structures like iliotibial band on the leg, calcaneal tendon, galea aponeurotica on the head. So those locations and then those structures, you also have to deal with origins, insertions, actions, innervations. And if you think about it, out of those 25, 26 questions, most of those, the majority of those are going to be name the location. So if I ask this model, what's this muscle? Rectus femoris. What's this muscle on this model? Frontalis. So if you go through them and you make sure you go through each and every one, your first step in this process is, can I locate all the muscles and structures on the model? And if you can do that, you're in really good shape for this test. And you'll see about 6 to 10 are from head and neck, 6 to 10 are from chest, abdomen, and back, 6 to 10 questions are from the arms, 6 or 10 are from the legs, which means it kind of gives me a lot of flexibility to build up around 25 questions just based off of these different views. Now, the actual structures that we have are going to come from the neuron, the blue one, which has a blue body, the white one that has a white body, 2 to 4 questions, so roughly around 5. You're going to have the brain. You're going to have the outside view of the brain. You're going to have the inside view of the brain. And remember, when you study, if you're a very visual learner, if you study the left brain, make sure you also study the right brain, because memorizing them and trying to figure out the mirror image of both of them can be very difficult for the majority of students. So the outside view of the brain, which would be the lobes, the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, or the sulcus or gyri, there's going to be around 2 to 4 questions. Inside is going to be around 2 to 6, and then cranial nerves can be 0 to 4, and I'll go over how do I want you to study the cranial nerves for this test. Then you have the spinal cord. We have many different models for the spinal cord, but all of them are just going to be the transverse section with the horns and the columns, also dorsal root ganglia, posterior median sulcus, anterior median fissure. And then the spinal cord and spinal nerves. It's this model over here with the conus medullaris, cauda equina, filum terminale. And then the rest of the test is going to be the ear and then the eye. The ear, you have 2 models in front of you. You also have this model right there, which just shows a close-up view of the inner and middle ear sections. You have the eye, which is going to be the purple backed eye model, and plus the muscles and the other eyes you see in front of that model. And that's going to make up the rest of the test. So pretty much 25 is going to come from this side of the table, 25 questions will come from this side of the table. And while you're studying, you're going to realize the models are much easier for most students to master than the muscles. So while you're listening to lectures and while you're going through each individual topic, like the neurons are only about 9 to 10 questions. Spinal cord, roughly around the same. So if you take these little by little and section by section, you could study in increments of 10 to 30 minutes a couple of times a day and master all the material you see in front of you in about a week, which you might not have a week to do this, but you can still do it by 20 minutes studying the neuron, then maybe rewarding yourself with looking at the computer, watching a TV show, or going to the gym or running, and then coming back to this and seeing what you remember. It's going to be that repetition that is going to build your confidence and your ability to switch things from short-term to long-term memory. That's going to be the difference between an A and an F on the test. And remember, for our test, it's going to be fill in the blank. It's going to be name that muscle. You have to type in or spell out deltoid. So let's get started with how do all these models eventually make your final exam. So I told you to break it up into sections. Head and neck. Head and neck is key because you have different models for the head and neck. You have this model right here, which this is the one I recommend everybody to start with. And then once you kind of master that, look at the other models. Go to this model and see if you can find the orbicularis oculi, orbicularis oris, and then move on to these models that are in front. And a lot of students, they skip the multiple models. They skip the pictures, they skip the videos, they skip all this other extra stuff and these extra steps. But if you can see it on one model and then be able to see the same structures on another model, you're more likely to master this material. So it is important to look at different models, even though I recommend and I'll tell you which one I'm most likely to put on the test. The students that take that extra step of a few minutes will do so much better and have a lot less stress and anxiety during the test. So let's get started. First, all the muscle locations should be studied and reviewed first. And while you're doing the reviewing of the location of all the muscles, then you can go back and do note cards. You can do extra stuff to do the origins, insertions, actions, and innervations. And right now, innervations and insertions, they sound like two completely separate words. But for some students, and I'm sad to say the majority of students, when they're nervous, innervation and insertion get flip-flopped or they get confused. And they'll write a nerve when what I'm talking about is the insertion. What is that muscle going into? What's that bone's name? And they'll give me facial nerve or something like that. So make sure while you're taking the test, you're reading the questions carefully. And then, yes, while you're doing in each class period, take the time and go over each and every location. And while you're spending about a half hour to an hour in class, or an hour or a half hour, an hour after each lecture, even if it's live online, you're able to take that time, look at the pictures, and label each and every model. And if you can do that, it won't take you more than an hour if you do it every little bit. You also are going to have videos. You have supplemental videos, you have supplemental pictures on the Canvas course for you to look at. If they help you, take the time and look at them. And then you also have that extra structure of the Galea aponeurotica. It's that white tendon sheath that's sitting on top of all of the models. And muscles insert into it. This chart looks a little strange because it's going, up and down and side to side. The reason why I did this type of look is because if you wanted to, you can print this out and have it in a landscape view and be able to look at all these different models. You need to know the orbicularis oculi, oris, frontalis, occipitalis, temporalis, zygomaticus major and minor, buccinator, sternocleidomastoid, and massive. Yes, you will see that there's a lot of origins and insertions that have multiple origins or multiple insertions for you to memorize, but if for the temporalis, frontalis, temporal bone, and parietal bone, if you're just thinking temporalis, what would be the bone you'd most likely to remember? Probably the temporal bone, because the name of the muscle is temporalis. So if you're doing note cards and you're trying to memorize this material and you only remember one but not all of them, cross the other ones out on your note cards because on your exam, you're only going to have to put one origin, one insertion, or one action for some of the muscles. So make sure whichever one sticks in your head, focus on that one and try to get through and try to get to the finish line of studying for this test. So you do have to know all of those. Also, you need to know the innervations for all of them. This is the model I told you to start with. So the Galea aponeurotica, frontalis, orbicularis oculi helps you wink. Orbicularis oris helps you blow a kiss. You have the zygomaticus minor and zygomaticus major. Masseter is going to be right on the side of your face. You're also going to have the sternocleidomastoid. A lot of students, they don't like the name sternocleidomastoid because it's just a long name to spell out. But sternum, clavicle, and it inserts into the mastoid process. So just by knowing the name of some muscles, you're going to know either the origin or insertions or what the action is. So it's important to know everything here. You also have the different side views where you can see the Galea aponeurotica, masseter. You can see the buccinator over on this side. And the buccinator on the video, I kind of zero in on that little yellow circle. And that yellow circle is a nerve, but that nerve is just going through the buccinator. And you can see the buccinator is deep because the mandible is cut right there, and the temporalis inserts into the mandible. You still have the sternocleidomastoid on the side. You have the occipitalis on the back. And then this is the way I would like for you all to study. Name that muscle. Orbicularis oris. Name this muscle. Zygomaticus minor. Name that muscle. Frontalis. And if you can have somebody, a friend, a family member, or a tutor in the SLC, just go through here and say, what's this insert into? The skin around the eyes. What's this insertion? Eyebrows. And if you're getting comfortable saying these different origins, insertions, actions, innervation, when somebody prompts you or asks you the question, you're going to know that you're ready for the test. If somebody says, name that muscle, and you go, I don't know, and it's the day before the test, you need to do a lot more studying and get prepared to know that this muscle in the neck is the sternocleidomastoid. Now for the chest, abdomen, and back. Same exact information as the head and neck. First, start with the location. Sit there, learn the locations, get comfortable with the locations. You're going to have the muscle woman and the muscle man for the chest, abdomen, and back muscle. So those are the two models you need to master in this case. You're also going to have a couple of structures you need to know. Those structures are going to be the linea alba, rectus sheath, and the inguinal ligament. The rectus sheath is just that white covering that covers up the rectus abdominis muscle. Linea alba runs down the middle or the midline, and the inguinal ligament is the one that's right down there going through the inguinal canal, right going to be down where the iliac crest is going into the pubic bone. And another thing that's special about this, the latissimus dorsi isn't on your chart, but the latissimus dorsi is a very important muscle, so I just want you to memorize the location of the latissimus dorsi. Let's find them on the lobes. So you still have the chart. You're still responsible for the origins, insertions, actions, and innervations. Here's the muscle man. You have the pectoralis major, rectus abdominis, linea alba, rectus sheath. You also have the external abdominal oblique, along with the serratus anterior. All of those can be found on the front. On the back, you have the trapezius, up there in the neck, and the latissimus dorsi. And remember, latissimus dorsi is just named the location of that muscle. You also have the muscle woman. Same exact structures can be found on the muscle woman, on the front and on the back. The difference about this is that if I take the chest cavity, I can remove the chest cavity from the muscle woman. And here you can see the diaphragm is clearly present on the muscle woman. The diaphragm is very important because the diaphragm is the prime mover for respiratory and the lungs. If you don't have the diaphragm anymore, you can't breathe on your own. And then you'll have to be on a respirator. So the phrenic nerve, the nerve that innervates the diaphragm, is extremely important and should be memorized. Some of your lecture teachers might actually go a step further and say, what is the spinal root for the phrenic nerve? That's going to be C, 3, 4, and 5. Keep you alive. So all the roots of the phrenic nerve start all the way up in the upper part of your neck. Then you have this model right here. And this model is very, very, very important because this is the only model that has the internal oblique and the transverse abdominis. It's also going to have your pectoralis minor, but we'll get to that in a second. So you'll see on both sides there's going to be oblique muscles, and they're oblique because they're running at angles. Here you can see the muscle fibers right here are running down towards the midline. This is your external oblique. Over here is the internal oblique. And some students, they say internal because you can see the ribs over here. But the key to this model is looking at muscle fibers. And when you're looking at a cadaver or a cat or any type of human cadaver or anything, you're looking at muscle fibers when you're doing muscles. And this is one of those keys where it's important to look at the muscle fibers. And this is not a mirror image. A mirror image is that if I took my hand, look at a mirror, it's like this. But when I look at them, they're not the same. So the muscle fibers are going to run towards the midline, like you're putting your hands in your pocket. That's going to be external oblique. Now if I took my hands, did them like this, you're going to see the muscle fibers are running away from the midline. That's going to be internal oblique. And a lot of students are going to struggle with that, and that's the reason why I tell every student, study the models first, memorize the location of the models first, because if you can't get that down, you're going to have a very difficult time further on in nursing and medical school, because then they're going to make you focus on muscle fibers and where they run between the origins and insertions. And if you have trouble with the external and internal oblique while you're studying, you're going to have further trouble later on. And one more thing about this model is on the inside, you do have the transverse abdominis. And that covers all the muscles I talked about. I did mention something about a minor pectoralis. And the reason why I do not have this on your test is you probably can't even pick it out on this video, because pectoralis major is so big, there's a small line underneath it that is your actual pectoralis minor. And because the pectoralis major just sits on top of the minor, I don't have a model of the ones you see in front of us that shows a good representation of the pectoralis minor. So if you wanted to, you could cross that out on that study guide. The arm, same thing, study the models first. We do have rotator cuff and the teres major. The rotator cuff is supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis, and then the teres major. The rotator cuff muscles all go to the head of the humerus. Teres major does not. So let's take a look at the chart, and then we'll look at the actual rotator cuff muscles. If you look here, this is when you start having a lot of different muscles for you to memorize. This is when you start doing different compartments within the arm and the leg. Here at deltoid, that's easy. Shoulder, brachialis, brachioradialis, triceps, and biceps. I think I know that. Biceps is on top, brachialis is in the middle, triceps, I've heard those before. brachioradialis is this one right here. So if you just took your arm out straight, that little bump that sticks out is your brachioradialis. And everything below it, between teres major and the supinator, are all going to be on the forearm. So you have flexors and you have extensors. You have one that pronates and one that supinates. In fact, this one is another one of those muscles that I have to remove a lot of these muscles on this particular model, and because it's so deep, I don't put the supinator on most of my tests. So if you wanted to, you could kind of cross that out. But all the other ones are very easy for me to ask. Let's look at them. So subscapularis, supraspinatus is above the spine, infraspinatus is below the spine, deltoid covers them all. Here the deltoid's removed, so you see the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, the teres minor, and then the teres major. And here, you can see how all of those muscles, they all create a capsule or a rotator cuff on top of the head of the humerus to keep the head of the humerus into the glenoid cavity. Teres minor just goes to the humerus itself, its neck. So that is why the teres major is not considered a rotator cuff when teres minor is considered a rotator cuff muscle. You do have the biceps, brachialis, and triceps. You have the palmaris longus going to the palm. And if you look at this model, palmaris longus, you follow that line or that tendon, and it goes to the palm. That is going to be palm side, palmaris longus. This one is going to the thumb. And remember, you can rate things up or down with your thumb, so your radius is thumb side. And because if you decrease in angle, you're flexing, increase in angle, you're extending, this is your flexor carpi radialis, flexor carpi ulnaris, pronator teres is just next to the flexor carpi radialis. Same thing on the back, but that time you're going to start with the brachioradialis. So brachioradialis, then you do the extensor carpi thumb radius, extensor digitorum, and then over on your pinky side will be your extensor carpi ulnaris. Yes, there are a lot of muscles to memorize on the hand and the arm, but if you just break them up into the forearm and then the upper ones, they'll become a little bit easier for you to digest and for you to memorize. And again, just have somebody ask you, name that muscle, brachialis. Name this muscle, brachioradialis. And if you have somebody asking you these questions and you just don't know the name, make a printout of the study guide. And while you're making a printout of the study guide, have it out. While you're looking at it and having somebody ask you this question, look at your study guide, look what it's labeled, and say, oh, that's the extensor digitorum. And if you're doing that over and over again, the repetition of somebody pointing to this and saying, name the muscle, deltoid, you'll be able to memorize this in no time. But it will take some time on your part to memorize. Same thing on the leg. The extra structures here are the iliotibial band and the calcaneal tendon. I do not want you to put down Achilles tendon. You will get that wrong on the test. If you do put that, the gastrocnemius goes into the calcaneal tendon. The calcaneal tendon goes into the calcaneus, or your heel. This is also just as scary as the arms, but again, biceps femoris, semitendinosus, semimembranosus, those are the three muscles that make up the hamstring. That's the longest muscle in the body, the sartorius. Rectus femoris, vastus intermedialis, lateralis, and medialis. Those four make up the quadriceps. Gluteus maximus and medius. You're sitting on your maximus right now. The medius is just medial to that. Tensor fascia lata tenses a fascia called your iliotibial band I just mentioned. Adductor longus and gracilis are on the inside or the medial part, also called the inseam. Tibialis anterior is on the front of the tibia. gastrocnemius is your calf. So if you go through these, first, know the location, then go over origins, insertions, actions, and innervations, you'll be able to get this in no time at all. Here's your tensor fascia lata leading into the iliotibial band. You have your gluteus maximus, gluteus medius. You have your semitendinosus and membranosus. You'll see the tendinosus is just sitting on top of the membranosus. And because tendinosus has a T in it, T for top. There's a look of the gluteus maximus, sartorius. Another look at the hamstring muscles of the gluteus, of the semitendinosus and semimembranosus, and the biceps femoris. So look at these models, memorize the location of the muscles first, then go back and try to figure out the origins, insertions, actions, and innervations. And some of you might notice that you have a hard time with the note cards, you have a hard time memorizing origins, insertions, actions, innervations. What if I just told you this is going down here? It's going to the patella. The patella then goes into the tibia. So the insertion for the rectus femoris, even if you went back to that chart, rectus femoris is right here. Tibial tuberosity via the patellar ligament. So if you're saying patella and the tibia, you're getting that right on the test. You just need to be able to tell me that you know which one's the origin and which one's the insertion. So please make sure you take the time to study this material before your test. And again, have somebody ask you the questions. What's that? Calcaneal tendon. What's that? Gastrocnemius. And that's the first 25 questions on your test. The next 25 questions are going to come from this side of the table, or the neuron. So the neurons are going to be the blue and the white, because those are the only ones we have in lab. You have the synaptic knobs and the dendrites. Synaptic knobs are that rubbery one. The dendrites are the hard plastic ones. You have the soma, nucleus, nucleolus. You do have all the other organelles in there, like the mitochondria, rough and smooth ER, but the only ones I want you to memorize: nucleus, nucleolus, axon hillock, axon, myelin sheath, node of Renvier. And this one is kind of special because this little part comes off. And here on this picture, you can see that removed, and you can see how the axon runs all the way down and is just covered by multiple layers of myelin. And the myelin is going to be maintained in the peripheral nervous system by Schwann cells. You can still see the node of Renvier. Do the same thing with the white. With all of the synaptic knobs, you have all of the dendrites. You have the soma, nucleus, nucleolus, axon hillock, axon, node of Renvier, myelin sheath, the layers, and then the Schwann cell. And you can see this is when I remove this cap off of it. You can still see the nucleus and the nucleolus, axon hillock, and then the axon. What's this structure? What's this structure? What's that structure right there? Try to answer those questions. And if you can, go on to the next model. If you can't, go back to the pictures and try to figure out this, and that. And that's how I'm going to be coming up with your final for this test. All I do is I draw arrows to any of the structures we've talked about. For the brain, Students really do have a hard time with the mirror image of this, and you don't know this, and you don't know if you're having a difficulty time with it until you actually take a test. So please have students or have friends help you and ask questions and just point to things to see if you're having difficulty with this. Because the amount of material you need to memorize on this is not astronomical. Frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe, those are just the bones that sit on top of these lobes. The gyri and the sulci, all of these little indentations, all of those little indentations are sulci. All the bumps are gyri. And students will read this and say, you know, the gyri, the sulci is right there, and the gyri is there. That's the only place it is. So if I ask it over here and say, name that structure, you're going to put a sulci because that's going to be an indentation. If I say, what's that bump over here? What's this structure? That structure is going to be gyri. The lobes are frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. So make sure you read the question on questions like this. You also have a central sulcus. Central sulcus separates the frontal and the parietal lobes. Right in front, anterior to the central sulcus, is your primary motor cortex. Your primary motor cortex is responsible for one part is going to go to the leg. Another part, all of those fibers are going to the arm. Another part, all of those fibers are going to go to the face, or the neck, or the torso. So you're going to have in your lecture class something called a homunculus, which is going to show you where each part of those fibers are going to. But primary motor is going to be in the frontal lobe. Primary sensory is just going to be posterior to the central sulcus, and that's going to be for sensory. So if I feel somebody touch me on the shoulder, I know that sense is going to a certain part of my primary sensory cortex. And if you look, I can do different views of the brain. All of those different things. And then you have the sagittal section. And the sagittal section's pretty easy if you just take it like this. This is the front, that's the back. Corpus callosum, pineal gland, thalamus, hypothalamus, optic chiasm. Behind the optic chiasm is the mammillary body. Then you have the midbrain, the pons, the medulla oblongata. You have the cerebellum. You have those white lines of the arbor vitae. In front of that is your fourth ventricle, cerebral aqueduct. And in here, you can't really see it because it's a two-dimensional picture. But if you were able to hold the models, you're going to see around the thalamus and hypothalamus is like a space. That space is actually the third ventricle. So it's important for you to know that. But now if you see this, you're memorizing this particular model right here. What if I asked you on this one? How easy for you to be, what's that? What's that? Name that structure. Name that structure. And if you just kind of looked at it and said, oh my God, I don't know, then remember, in your lecture, you have one. In the review, I have the mirror image of that. So for some of you, you will have to make two specific models to memorize because you will have the difficulty with memorizing a mirror image. Now let's get to cranial nerves. Cranial nerves starts with the Roman numerals. So 1 all the way to 12. When you're doing this, write them out. 1 dash is 1. 2 is 2. 5 is V. X is going to be 10. Get into the habit of writing them out and then knowing every time I see 1 dash, it's olfactory. 2 is optic, 3 is ocular motor, 4 is trochlear, 5 is trigeminal, 6 is abducens, 7 is facial, 8 is vestibulocochlear, 9 is glossopharyngeal, 10 is vagus, 11 is spinal accessory or accessory, and then 12 is hypoglossal. You cannot see it in any of these models because the camera's too far away, but I do have a picture coming up that shows you on one side of these models, you have the Roman numerals written 1 through 12. If you get the side that has the Roman numerals entered already, all you're going to have to do is you already memorized it. If you see an X, you write down, type in Vegas. If you see a V111 or an 8, vestibulocochlear, which is going to be equilibrium and balance, which is going to be on the ear. How about 4 for trochlear? Trochlear, you're going to learn on the eye, there's a structure called the trochlea that's going to be wrapping around the superior oblique muscle. So it's going to move the eye because it moves the superior oblique muscle. So knowing the Roman numerals and knowing the names is where you start with. So here, you can see there's Roman numerals. Do you remember what V11 was? Or 7? Do you remember what 2 is? Do you remember 10? If you don't, go back to the Roman numerals and make sure that you start there and then go back. You can do olfactory, optic, ocular motor. That's 1, 2, 3. You also have 12, which is going to be hypoglossal. You have 10 down there, which is going to be vagus. So knowing all these, 7, which I pointed out earlier, is going to be facial. So go back, memorize the Roman numerals and the name for the cranial nerves, and then if you get that side, you're good to go. But you could also get this side that doesn't have the Roman numerals. If you get the side that does not have Roman numerals, just think of it as a structure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Olfactory, optic, ocular motor. Know where 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is. And if you look, this is the pons. So it's just simply going front to back, medial to lateral. The first 5 cranial nerves are very easy to find on the brain as long as you use front to back, medial to lateral. Those are the 2 ways I can ask cranial nerve questions on your test. Up next, spinal cord. We have 3 different types of models, these 3 right here. All of them start with these bulge or cell bodies in the back. All of those are going to be the dorsal root ganglia. Once you know the dorsal root ganglia, you know what the back of the spinal cord is. Dorsal root ganglia is coming from the back, so that makes this the back. That makes this the front. The white or the lighter color are going to be columns. The dark is going to be horns. So you have a dorsal column, dorsal horn, lateral column, lateral horn, ventral column, ventral horn. I know I have horns on this side, columns on this side, but you have a ventral column over there, a ventral column over there, just like you have a ventral horn and a ventral horn. And I know this is the front because I see the dorsal root ganglia on the back. You also have the posterior median sulcus, anterior median fissure, right there. Posterior median sulcus, anterior median fissure. But with the spinal cord, it all starts with the dorsal root ganglia. Can you determine where the back is? And this one all starts with this structure right there that makes a cone. That is called the medullary cone or conus medullaris. This is T12. L1 is just below it. You see that the spinal cord in an adult ends around T12, L1, and it makes that cone shape of the medullary cone. You have a nerve that's a little bit thicker that runs all the way down the middle, all the way down the coccyx. That is your filum terminalis. Because all of those nerves are making axons, all of those axons, if you pulled them out, they kind of look like a horse's tail or a ponytail. You take your hair back and put it in a ponytail. But we can't call it a ponytail, so we need to use Latin. So cauda equina, equina horse, cauda means tail, so horse's tail in Latin, cauda equina, is a combination of all of those axons. And if you think about it, why does your spinal cord end up there? Well, all of you grew a lot in your teenage years. When you're around 9, 10, depending on different types of things like genetics, diet, and everything else, your spinal cord did go all the way down to your sacrum and your coccyx. But while you grew taller, it was easier for your neurons just to grow longer axons than to keep growing new spinal cord. So that is why your medullary cone or conus medullaris is going to be around T12L1. Also why you get a spinal tap or an epidural in your lower back, because down here you just have axons of all of the neurons in the cauda equina. And here's the model right here, where you have your conus medullaris, phylum terminale running all the way down, and then all of those fibers right there would make up your cauda equina. And last but not least, the ear. You have the two models in front of you for the ear. It all starts with the outside of the helix, goes into the auditory tube. Tympanic membrane is going to be the eardrum. Don't call it an eardrum, call it tympanic membrane. You have the three bones, or the ossicles of the ear, malleus, incus, stapes. Malleus is the one that touches the tympanic membrane. Stapes is the one in the incus is the one in the middle, and stapes is the one that's touching the oval window. Let me go to a close-up view of that. So you can see that. The malleus is touching the tympanic membrane. Incus is the one in the middle, and then the stapes is covering the oval window, which is going to eventually, almost like little Morse code, put little pressure here. That pressure then goes into the spiral organ of the cochlea, which you can determine sound waves. Over here, the vestibular ducts. Vestibular ducts are going to be different type of angular rotation and movement. This is where you're going to have balance. This is where you're going to have hearing. So the vestibule does balance, cochlea does hearing. That is why the vestibular cochlear nerve does hearing in equilibrium. We also have this model right here. That's just a close-up view of the middle and inner ear. The thing that sets this one apart, you can see the tympanic membrane, malleus, incus, stapes, vestibule, and cochlear. Here you can see the individual nerve fibers making up the vestibular nerve, and the individual nerve fibers making up the cochlear nerve. And you can still make out the semicircular ducts, and have different angles of it, so it can show you different parts of that model. And finally, finishing up, you have the eye. The eye is going to be this model right here. I have it upside down because you wouldn't be able to see it if I didn't have it upside down. It all starts with the light entering the cornea. Cornea then passes through the anterior chamber. Behind that is the pupil. The iris regulates how big or small the pupil is. So iris, pupil. Behind the pupil is the lens. The lens is held in there by suspensory ligaments, and then the ciliary bodies hold the suspensory ligaments in there. And what they do is they flatten the lens and then widen the lens. And this allows you to focus on close up and far away. Then behind that you have the vitreous humor inside the vitreous body. You have the three layers of the retina, choroid, sclera. Sclera is white. Choroid is brownish black, and then the retina is yellow because it's neuronal fiber, or it's neuronal tissue, so they usually color it yellow. In your retina, you have a special area called your macula lutea. Your macula lutea is like the big dartboard in the back of your eye. This is where you have the majority of your cones. This is why you keep turning your head from side to side to make sure that light is hitting your macula lutea. The center of the macula lutea is the fovea centralis, or the bullseye. This is where you want to make sure you focus and you get the highest resolution image, because in your fovea centralis, or the center, is where you have the most cones, which means you have the most ability to see fine images and stuff like that. That's why if you look at something, you'll always see something in perfect, crisp view. Things around it, the light is not going to be hitting that. It's going to be hitting out here. And the further you go away from your macula lutea, the less and less cones you're going to have, the more rods you're going to have. That's why in night vision, most things are blurry, because most of the eye is just going to be with rods, and they do have more of a blurry, grayish, purple, dark image. And this is just a close-up where you have your indentation of your macula lutea. The middle of it is your fovea centralis. You do have this output of the retina, which is going to be ganglion cells. You can't see them right there, but they're all going to have axons that are going to make up the optic nerve. And when they enter the optic nerve, they create something called an optic disc or blind spot. And they do that because there's no rods or cones right there, so there's no visual ability for the eye in this optic disc or blind spot. And that makes up the optic nerve. There's only one more thing we need to cover. That's going to be the muscles. So the muscles of the eye are either going to be rectus muscles or oblique muscles. You have a superior rectus, lateral rectus, inferior rectus, medial rectus. Every single rectus muscle goes from front to back. So if you look at the muscle fibers and you memorize superior, lateral, inferior, medial, all you're looking for is fibers to run front to back, or anterior to posterior. The other two are going to be oblique muscles. The oblique muscles are superior oblique and inferior oblique. And here you can see part of the superior oblique muscle up here going around a structure called the trochlea. And because that's called the trochlea, the cranial nerve that innervates the superior oblique muscle is the trochlear nerve. So that is why you have so many cranial nerves doing eye movement. You have ocular motor, you have abducens. Abducens is just going to abduct the eye. So all it is doing is going to be innervating the lateral rectus muscle, because that is what's abducting the eye. So you also have adduct the eye. So you also have the inferior oblique down there. So that is all of the muscles. Please make sure you cover all of that, and make sure you just kind of study the location on the models. We're not doing function and everything else, so you don't need to go over this is the cranial nerve for this is the cranial nerve for that. What is important is if I point to the top of the eye, and if I go, what's this? You're going to be able to say, oh, it's going straight back. That's
superior rectus.
What's that ring of muscle around it? That's the iris. So take your time and make sure when you are going over this, and you are looking at this, you know where each and every structure that we talked about in this review. Go back to the lecture, make sure you cover the lecture, and once you do all that, you are ready for the final. Good luck.